Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack something absolutely massive. We are looking at the most violent, destructive, armed conflict in human history. We're talking about a war that in just 6 years completely redrew the map of the world and permanently altered the course of human civilization. To really wrap our heads around a global conflict of this magnitude, we're going to break it down step by step. We'll cover the origins of totalitarianism, the major turning points on the battlefield, the massive leap in modern military technology, the horrific human cost, the atomic conclusion, and finally, how it built the world we live in today. Let's get into it. Part 1, Origins and Totalitarianism, the Spark of Global Conflict. We really have to start by setting the scene of a world that was just utterly exhausted. World War I left Europe physically, financially, and psychologically drained. And you know what happens when there's that much instability? It creates a massive political vacuum. That void was quickly filled by a new breed of totalitarian dictators who essentially promised to restore national pride at absolutely any cost. The real ideological blueprint for the coming war was fascism. It started taking root when Benito Mussolini's black shirts seized power in Italy back in 1922, and they set up this model of absolute top-down dictatorial control. Well, Adolf Hitler soon mirrored that exact approach in Germany. He totally capitalized on the massive economic devastation of the Great Depression and the really bitter resentments people still had over the Treaty of Versailles to transform Germany into a single-party Nazi dictatorship. From there, it was basically an unchecked cascade of territorial expansions that rapidly marched the whole globe toward a Second World War. The pattern was incredibly clear. Japan goes after resources in Manchuria, Italy tries to carve out an empire in Ethiopia, and Germany aggressively expands its borders to swallow up German-speaking populations. And the international community? Primarily through the League of Nations, they proved completely powerless to stop it. Finally, when Hitler invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, Britain and France drew a hard line, and the global powder keg officially ignited. Part 2. Major Battles and Turning Points, the Inferno. As things accelerate into 1939, our narrative shifts right to the battlefield. The world was about to find out that the rules of warfare had been violently rewritten since the trench days of World War I. Germany completely shocked everyone with a devastating new strategy, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Instead of getting bogged down in static trenches, the German military used massive, division-sized tank units, deeply coordinated with mechanized infantry and absolute air superiority. It was a strategy of overwhelming speed and concentrated power, and it caused the rapid, stunning collapse of France and forced the British into a really desperate retreat at Dunkirk. So how did the Allies finally hit back? They first struck effectively in the European theater down in North Africa. Under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, American and British forces launched massive amphibious landings. This was absolutely critical. It was the first step in creating a vice that eventually cut off and defeated Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's incredibly formidable German-Italian Panzer Army, securing the Mediterranean. That southern push was really just one part of a gigantic multi-front squeeze. The Allies pushed up through Italy and eventually France. But we can't forget that while the Americans and British were pushing from the west and south, the Soviet Union was locked in this titanic, unimaginably bloody death struggle on the Eastern Front. They were literally tying down over 200 German divisions across a 2,000-mile front. The boots-on-the-ground reality behind those massive strategic maneuvers was incredibly visceral. Just think about Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. D-Day. American soldiers faced intense, highly concentrated German fire during those amphibious landings. It was an absolutely brutal fight just to secure a tiny, narrow stretch of stony beach, which eventually led to agonizingly slow, deadly battles through the thick hedgerows of Normandy before they could finally break out into France. You know, what's really fascinating about World War II is that it was fundamentally a war of two dual natures. We just talked about Europe, which required these massive overland ground assaults, freezing winter sieges, and millions of infantrymen. But half a world away, the Pacific theater was an entirely different beast. It was distinctly naval, completely defined by carrier task forces, fighting across a vast ocean dotted with thousands of heavily fortified coral islands. In the Pacific, the U.S. strategy relied heavily on grueling, island-hopping amphibious assaults. Troops would hit the beaches, fight fiercely just to secure a tiny airstrip, and then literally leapfrog to the next target. This really methodical strategy slowly choked off Japanese supply lines while inching American bomber forces closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. Part 3. Technology of Modern Warfare. Rapid Acceleration. To pull off these massive, incredibly different operations on opposite sides of the planet at the exact same time, military technology had to evolve at an absolutely breakneck pace. Necessity really did become the mother of invention here. If you strip it down, the core difference between this conflict and World War I was absolute mobility. Armies were no longer stuck in the mud fighting a slow war of sheer attrition. World War II forces were highly mobile. They were moving incredibly fast across entire continents, and doing that required a massive leap forward in sophisticated radios for coordination, advanced aircraft, and heavy, reliable armor. This technological leap required some serious on-the-fly ingenuity. For example, the portable Bailey Bridge proved utterly vital in places like Italy, letting heavy mechanized forces just keep rolling smoothly right over destroyed river crossings. On the flip side, things like barrage balloons showed the constant adaptation needed to shield troops and infrastructure from the very real, terrifying new threat of low-level aerial bombardments. Part 4. The Holocaust and Human Cost. The Ashes. Okay, we need to slow down here for a minute and confront the truly solemn, devastating reality of this conflict. Because behind the grand strategies and the shiny new technology lies the unimaginable human toll exacted on civilian populations worldwide. I want us to focus on just a single, staggering number for a moment. 6 million. This represents the 6 million Jewish lives deliberately and systematically extinguished in concentration camps under Hitler's horrific final solution. It is a scale of genocide that forever darkened the course of human history. Meanwhile, over in the Soviet Union, an estimated 10 million farmers died during the Holodomor. And the crazy thing is, this wasn't battlefield combat. This was a devastating famine resulting directly from Joseph Stalin's ruthless agricultural collectivization policies and political purges. It perfectly shows how dictators literally weaponized essential resources against their own people. And we have to look at what happened right here at home, too. Fueled by wartime paranoia and deep-seated racism following Pearl Harbor, Executive Order 9066 forced 120,000 Japanese Americans completely out of their homes. They were placed into remote, military-supervised internment camps, unjustly stripped of their property and their fundamental civil rights. So, faced with a fanatic enemy in Japan that outright refused to surrender, even as their empire collapsed, and looking at an unparalleled global death toll that was rising by the thousands every single day, the Allies were left with a truly harrowing question. How do you force an absolute, immediate end to the bloodshed? Part 5. The Atomic Bomb and Victory. The Final Dominoes. The final acts of the war in the Pacific would ultimately answer that question. But in doing so, they introduced a terrifying new existential power to the human race. The conclusion of the Pacific War played out in a rapid, highly dramatic sequence. The incredibly bloody battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa put U.S. bombers directly within range of Japan. When Japan refused to surrender, the United States unleashed its newly developed atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. Coupled with the Soviet Union's sudden invasion of Manchuria, the unprecedented devastation of those atomic weapons forced Japan's formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945. Part 6. A World Forever Changed. The New World Order. When the smoke finally cleared over a shattered Europe and a completely stunned Asia, the map of the world, its global power structures, and its fundamental approach to human rights had been permanently altered. To make sure a global tragedy like this never repeated itself, Allied leaders took some truly unprecedented steps. They organized historic war crimes trials, in Nuremberg for the Nazis and in Tokyo for the Japanese leadership. This firmly established that government leaders could and would be held legally accountable for crimes against humanity. Plus, rising from the ashes of the failed League of Nations, the United Nations was formed to foster international peacekeeping, cooperation, and a brand new focus on global human rights. As you reflect on this explainer and the sheer magnitude of what we've covered, I really want to leave you with this final thought. Consider how the legacy of those 6 devastating years, the new borders drawn, the massive institutions created, and the terrifying dawn of the atomic age continues to quietly govern the balance of power and the profound fragility of peace in the world you woke up to this morning. Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning the history that shapes our present.